So the Colorado AI Act, it's significant because it's really the first and only attempt at a comprehensive AI regulation in the United States. So, we're talking a lot about AI regulation internationally and things like the EU AI Act. We've seen other countries and jurisdictions go for a more comprehensive approach. Besides Colorado in the United States, what we've seen is, you could say sectoral, but it's really even smaller than that, right? I mean, it's laws for things like deep fakes, things like, AI in the healthcare space. Colorado's is really a lot more comprehensive. So it doesn't apply to every use of AI, but it's basically a risk-based approach. And if you're doing certain things with your AI, it applies to it. And so it's
Mhm.
really unique because of that comprehensive approach. It could regulate any type of entity if they're doing the right things with AI, where you fall into that bucket of regulation. That's important because of the effects it has on both businesses in Colorado, but also in the United States as a whole, right? You get a lot of AI developers or AI deployers thinking about how are we going to handle Colorado once it becomes effective? How do we need to position around that? So, it becomes a bit of a roadblock or speed bump, depending how you want to look at it, to a lot of the advancement of AI, depending on how you're doing that.
I see. And I mean, I know you wrote a piece in June about this law and kind of noting the state's, I don't know, I would say ambivalence towards the law in terms of like balancing consumer protections with innovation concerns, as you just mentioned. What's changed in the past few months since the law was passed and signed?
Yeah, I think, what has changed is you've just seen that Colorado has a chance to really be that leader. So for a while, when the governor was signing the Colorado AI Act, he was really like, hey, I think there should be some changes here. Everybody, candidly, except for, maybe the legislators that passed it, were a little lukewarm on it. But between the signature date and today, there was a lot of things that we thought would kind of make it a moot point. So for example, the big beautiful bill, for a while there was this talk on an AI regulation moratorium. And it was important to note that, that moratorium, for most of its lifespan while folks were talking about it, would prevent states from even enforcing laws that had already passed. So it's not just you can't pass new laws that had already been passed, like Colorado's, you couldn't even enforce. And so for a long time, folks were kind of sitting on their hands. I mean, we were still advising on Colorado AI Act, but we thought, okay, maybe Big Beautiful Bill is going to kind of render this obsolete. Of course, that moratorium was then pulled out of the Big Beautiful Bill. It didn't exist in the final passed version. And that's when folks started talking about this again, of saying, okay, well, now Colorado, it's going to be a thing. That time is rapidly approaching. And so they started to turn their focus back to it. Trump then came
Hmm.
out with his AI action plan, which basically one of the first things in the AI action plan is talking about how they want to withhold federal funding from states with what they view as burdensome AI regulatory regimes. And I think, Colorado has got to be case in point for that, right? Maybe some other states with some of those more specific kind of one-off laws, they might be targeted, but for sure it was, I think, the one state that if they're going to target anybody, it would be Colorado. And so now, we've had this confluence of, okay, we're just months out from the effective date. What are we going to do here? What is Colorado going to do? Are we going to go forward with this law and all the effects that it has, and including on perhaps federal funding, or are we going to make a change? And that's where I think where we sit today is trying to figure out, hey, we're at this crossroads. How do we move forward?
Right, right. And so Governor Jared Polis, he called a special session that begins on August 21st, mainly prompted by a budget shortfall in the state. How likely is it, do you think, that legislators will revise or delay implementing Colorado's AI Act, especially amid other priorities and concerns?
I think extremely likely. I mean, you never want to say 100%, especially as a lawyer. I never want to give certainty on anything, right? But I will say I think it's extremely, extremely likely. A lot of the minds in the space, including myself, we thought that this issue alone might be enough to call a special session. Now that there's being a special session called for, some of the budgetary and other concerns, regardless, I think they will certainly look at the Colorado AI Act, and I would be. I would be stunned if they didn't look at it, or I would be stunned if they looked at it, but it came out largely unscathed. I think we're going to see a lot of big changes to it.
What kind of revisions do you think lawmakers will make? I know one of the concerns and criticisms from opponents, especially big tech developers and companies like Amazon, Google, Salesforce, who opposed it originally, was that it placed a burden on compliance. I know cost was Another critique, the cost and burden on small businesses, perhaps. What changes do you think? Oh, and the terminology in the bill. There was a lot of criticism that it was a little bit too vague. What
Yeah.
changes do you think lawmakers will make to not only keep the oversight and protections, but maybe ease up on some of those concerns that tech developers have brought up?
You, and you hit it on the head with the concerns. And I think, as far as where it will land after the special session, assuming there's changes, I think there's really a range, right? And I could see on one end, it really is, hey, we're cleaning up some of the definitional things. There's a lot of vagueness, there's ambiguity, there's some things that, how does this really work? It wasn't fully maybe thought through. So I think at minimum, those things were going to be tweaked, right? And get some more definitional clarity, trying to close some of those. I hate to say loopholes, but just questions that we have, like questions that professionals in the space have of, hey, we're trying to comply with this. My clients are trying to comply with this, but we really don't know how this actually works just because of the way the law is written. I think that's one end you could see that. You could also see the extreme end where, hey, this is going to be scaled back very massively, or do they even get rid of it, right? Who knows on that? I mean, we've heard certain things there, but it's hard to know. I think a full, like a chopping 80% of it, let's say, or getting rid of it completely, I still think that's unlikely. I think most likely what it'll be something in the middle where, yes, we'll get some of those definitional changes. They'll also take it probably a step further, and maybe there'll be some applicability thresholds. And this is something we see a lot with privacy laws, including Colorado's privacy law, is there's an applicability threshold because we really are more worried, or the legislature is really more worried about the bigger companies and bigger entities. And so I wouldn't be surprised if you see some sort of concept like that put in. There's a lot of compliance elements and compliance components. I wouldn't be surprised if some of that got weakened, at least for AI deployers, right? So there's this concept in the law between a developer, basically somebody who makes the AI platform, the AI system, and the deployer, right? So hey, I'm a company that I just license that AI from somebody. I'm going to use it on my site. I think the deployers might see a little bit of relief there and see a little bit of their burden step back a little bit. But it's hard to know. It's hard to know. I mean, this is something that before the law was passed, we were all talking about the forms that we think it would take, and the final form is something that I think surprised a lot of us, myself included, because of how it came out and how burdensome it was. So I would not be surprised if some of the changes are also surprising.
Sure, sure. And I mean, in absence of more federal guidance, I know Trump just came out with, this his AI for like vision for America, but we don't actually have any federal regulations that states can look to possibly model in their own state. You mentioned these one-offs where there's AI laws around using AI for political ads, or using AI and not making it not harm consumers or voters. I'm curious, in the absence of that, do you think Colorado legislators can learn anything from possibly the EU and in their AI mandates?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so the EU AI Act is really interesting because I think in my opinion, it's quite aggressive, right? And I think, what I would hope Colorado would learn from the EU is maybe more of a graduated approach. I think the EU AI Act, it came out kind of fast and furious, and there's been a lot of talk from commentators, and admittedly, a lot of these commentators have kind of a pro AI bias or a stake in the game, but saying that this has really hurt the European Union, their ability to compete on AI. And I think that's something that I think the Colorado legislature should keep in mind of, hey, do we want to put something in place that's a roadblock? I think another thing that we've seen with the EU AI Act is a lot of these kind of robust compliance requirements, a lot of the stuff behind the scenes, it's a little bit harder to implement, and that's where a lot of the cost is coming from. So I think a lot of the cost is coming from, things that a company must do behind the scenes, but it doesn't change how like you or I would interact with that company. And so, another thing I would hope that Colorado would take away is, if we're going to do something, let's focus on the transparency, right? Like the notifying somebody of, hey, this is what we do with AI. This is how we're using it. I think that is something that is generally very well accepted, even on, the people that are very bullish on AI. I think a lot of folks are like, hey, we want to be transparent about this and be upfront about its uses and how it's affecting you. And so I think that's kind of a path moving forward that Colorado could take, is say, if we focus on the transparency, reduce some of these other compliance burdens, and it's going to be a work in progress. They're going to have to iterate. And if they want to be the first in the nation and to lead the way on this, I think that's great. But they also should be prepared to, this is something that's going to change over the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, maybe a couple times. And so if we want to be first, that's great, but we're going to have to be flexible as well.
I really like that first, but flexible because you're right. If they are going to be the first state of the nation to come out with a more robust legislation regulating this very rapidly emerging technology, they should be prepared that it's probably going to need some tweaks. They might stumble, they might get some heat, they might make mistakes, but to know that the law is written in pencil and not in pen and can be adjusted as various concerns come up. I think that's a really good way to frame it. I am curious, does the burdens that we're talking about, mostly in terms of cost and compliance, do they sit squarely on the shoulders of tech developers and deployers, or does the state incur some of those costs as well with this bill?
I would say, I mean, look, there's always some cost to the state, right? Because it's legislature that you have to maintain, and people are going to have questions and comments on it. There's going to be challenges to it, so there's never zero cost to the state. I will say that the way that they set this up, it's mainly going to be on the companies, right? I mean, it's their responsibility to handle some of these compliance efforts. Yeah, sure, we can think about how is enforcement going to look and how are those things going to take place, but I would say maybe for every dollar that the state incurs in costs, 100, and that might be on the low side for companies to incur. So, yeah, I think it's not like one of the privacy laws like Colorado Privacy Act where hey, the Colorado, their enforcement mechanism is going to have a lot to handle. I think that it could have a lot to handle, but there's nothing in the law that really requires that. I think a lot of it's going to be, at least on the front end, on companies themselves to make this happen, to be compliant and put things in place, even though you don't know what enforcement's going to look like yet. So, there's costs all around, there always is, but I think the cost is primarily falling on companies. And to your point, not just the developers, right? I mean, that's one of the hardest parts about this law is, I have clients that, hey, I'm a retailer or something like that. I'm a mobile app. But so you're not an AI expert, but now you have to deal with some of these things at least to understand your requirements on the law, if nothing else. And that's costly for them, right? Especially if it's not in your space. Pretty much AI expertise is the most expensive expertise out there right now. And so finding folks that can help you understand some of these things it's not cheap.
No, I can understand that. And especially when it comes to smaller businesses or companies like mobile applications that you were describing or retailers that don't have the resources like an Amazon, like a Google, like a Salesforce. I'm wondering though, for the companies, the giants, the tech giants who have a lot of influence in this space, the cost of compliance for them, does it really stifle innovation? Was there any truth to that?
I think it's a great point, right? I mean, certainly the huge players in the space, they have plenty of money, right? It's no doubt. But I think you have to think about what's the effect of this long term. And so I think what a lot of these companies are looking at is, and again, not to keep analogizing it to privacy, but what we just saw in privacy was we had one state, California, come out with a comprehensive privacy law, and then all these states started coming out with their own laws. And soon you have this big patchwork where a lot of different states are doing different things. When you get to that point, that is where it does become costly for companies because you could get to a point where you have 50 different sets of rules and also 50 different regulators looking at you. And so I think because of that, because of what they've seen in the privacy space, a lot of these big entities are being a little bit more aggressive on the Colorado AI Act, right? And to your point, this compliance, a lot of these companies are already doing a lot of this. They want to be best practice. Maybe they're looking at something like the NIST AI framework, which is not required, but it's a good way to manage your AI usage. And so they're doing a lot of stuff for that. Or they have EU AI compliance, right? So they're doing that stuff. But I think the worry is, hey, if we don't stop this now, if we are not upfront about the cost about this now, 5 years from now, do we have 50 different rules? And then now it is a big compliance burden, even for your biggest players.
I see. I see. I see. I see. I want to go back to what you said about, California also being a prominent player in the space, and when one state does something really impactful and to be the first to do it, a lot of states often follow suit. In terms of Colorado's AI Act, whether it's delayed, severely changed, or maybe gotten rid of altogether, what impact do you think that'll have on, or even if it's passed and everything stays the same? What impact do you think that will have on other states looking to it as they start making their own AI regulation laws?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think whatever happens in Colorado is going to be a big bellwether for most states, and I'll kind of explain that at the end. 49 out of 50 states, I'll say, because a lot of states already were thinking about, hey, should we go down this Colorado road? And it didn't work, right? I mean, you have some efforts in Virginia, some talk in Connecticut. And so I think if, they see Colorado really taking a massive step back from this, I think there's going to be a big demand to say, let's put a pin in this, let's pause. We don't know if we want to be a big state. Look what everything that Colorado just kind of went through, and do we really want to lead the way on this? Maybe we wait and position ourselves as maybe more pro AI business and see how the regulatory space shakes out. So, and maybe likewise, if Colorado, there's not a lot of changes or very few, and it becomes effective, and that is lauded, right? It could be possible that there's a lot of praise for that. Of hey, Colorado's leading the way, and you might see some lawmakers look at that and say, hey, this is a way for me to protect my state, or even more cynically, hey, this is a way for me to make a name for myself, right? Like I could pass my state's version of this, and that's a great check on my resume. I think the big always up in the air is California. And I'm not a California attorney, but California, that market is so big and so massive that they really can do things a little bit differently, right? And so if Colorado doesn't succeed, they might take that as kind of a mandate of, hey, we're the only state that's really big enough and powerful enough between our GDP and then our confluence of tech companies that live here to lead the way on this. And it's possible. I mean, that is purely speculation on my part, but I would not be surprised if, while 49 states take one message from, or I guess I should say 48, 49 minus Colorado, take one message from what happens here. I wouldn't be surprised if California, takes the opposite message and says, okay, we need to lead the way on this. But it's possible that they follow suit and they say, nope, Colorado didn't work out. We have more to lose by these type of laws than anybody, for sure. I mean, it's California. There's a lot of tech companies there. And they say, we're going to put a pin in our efforts as well. So that's why I think the Colorado thing is so interesting, and why we've had so much press here is because what happens here is it's going to show a lot of the cracks in what's going to happen in other states. So
Yeah, that's a really great point. I mean, California is home to what, 33 out of the 50 most prominent AI companies in the world. And we do, I mean, I'm a native Californian. I'm here in Sacramento now. We do lead the way on a lot of tech legislation, a lot of it because we have to regulate or provide oversight of the companies that exist and operate and do business in our state and in most of the world. But I think you're right. I mean, like it's a bigger state than Colorado. It has a bigger GDP. It has more resources. I do just want to go to final. What is the risk federally? We mentioned that Trump and the federal administration wants to make sure that this type of technology isn't stifled by over regulation. If Colorado keeps its law in place, which goes into effect in February next year, what are there any consequences in terms of the federal government not being as supportive to Colorado as a state or budget or I don't know, answering some of their requests?
yeah, it's a great question, and it's hard to fully know, right? I mean, when you look at Trump's AI action plan, it's fairly vague and talks about, hey, we're going to withhold federal funding for AI efforts to the extent that's permissible by law. I mean, there's a lot of gray area there. But certainly, AI, there's a lot of talk about, well, what's fueling AI? Is it GPUs, or what is the limiter, right? And you could say, well, the limiter might be cash, especially if you're one of these smaller companies and you're trying to have a startup in Colorado. Colorado certainly has a lot of government connections as well, and there's military bases and things like that. So, if you're a startup that's trying to target some of those markets, and now all of a sudden you're not getting that federal funding, it's hard to say what that effect could be. So there is real dollars on the line here, and I think that's a big part of it. Is how are we going to be seen in federal eyes, and are they just going to steer clear of us altogether? Especially when Colorado, like so many states, have tried to copy what California's done. I mean, we've tried to invest a lot into having a tech presence here, and how do we create those environments. We're certainly not alone there, but I think this could negate all those efforts, even if it's not the actual money being withheld. Just the perception of it, I think, could be very
Mm.
damaging, right? So the perception that hey, this is a tough state. This is not the state to start a business or to start a tech business, at least. That could be very damaging. You don't truly know. It's because of that, the vagueness in the AI action plan, and just some of the, unpredictability in the administration in general. I think, knowing the actual effect of it, if Colorado moves forward, anybody that says they have a good grasp on it, I think is candidly lying. But I do think that the perception, it could be just as damaging, if you're just a pro AI business person, as the reality of the federal money getting withheld.
Yeah, yeah, that is a good point. And it's also a good point I think you make as well that I mean, while California has a high concentration of tech companies and, is a tech hub, the Bay Area, uh, these hubs are springing up all over the country in Texas, in Florida, in Georgia, in Colorado, in Idaho, in a
Mhm.
lot of other places where business it's easier to start a business in in other states where they don't have so much regulation. So to that point, yes, this law could be very influential in determining maybe where the next more open state is in terms of tech companies.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that, right? Of folks leaving California and states battling for that, of how can we get them? And, that this is something that I think weakens Colorado's resume for that, which could be tough. It could be tough. It's hard to know right now. It's hard to see the future and see how tough and what is the dollars and cents there. But, you could see that perception being a barrier to, allowing that Denver Metro to compete with, Research Triangle or Austin, Texas, or some of those other areas that we think about as up and coming tech hubs.
Mhm. Well, we will see the results of the special session, and we'll have to wait and see how it goes, what's changed, and what impacts it'll have. But thanks so much for joining me to talk about what might happen.
Yeah, thanks, Sophia. Never a dull moment. So we'll see.